You're listening to Intuitive Machines' This Way Up podcast, Season 1, The Dream is Alive, the untold story about the first commercial company to land on the moon. I'm your host, Josh Marshall, and today we're talking to Intuitive Machines navigation lead, Mike Hansen. Mike picks up the story where we left off in Episode 2, orbiting the moon and finding out the lasers needed to land aren't working, and the team's solution to pull off the impossible, landing on the moon.
Was walking out, and as I was walking out, I heard that we had a signal. And
you were on your way out, thinking that it was over.
Not walking out of the building. I was walking out to talk to some other guys. Like, yeah, that was rough. But and then I heard, we got a signal. Well, so with them, I'll typically just say, like, I'm an aerospace engineer. I work, in aerospace. Most people eyes glaze over after that. So,
so you just get their attention, like, oh yeah, aerospace engineer. But then, like, if one of us asks the question, right, what's that answer?
No, there you go. Yeah. So I work in navigation engineering. So it's GN&C, I guess, more broadly, but I specialize in navigation. And so it's more focused on, when you have an autonomous vehicle, you need to know where it is, how fast it's going, how it's oriented in order to make decisions on where it needs to go and how it can get there. And so we solve that problem along with, also quantifying the certainty in that solution. So, this is where I think I am, and this is how confident I am in that solution.
And like where you're going.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So where you're going is more kind of a guidance control issue. The navigation portion of it is specifically, where am I currently right now? So
finding out where you are, and it's not necessarily the same as just popping it into Waze and figuring out where you are, because there's no GPS at the moon, right?
Yeah, so certainly on Earth, like the easy button is GPS when you can manage it. So as soon as you're past the satellites on Earth, you don't really have that. So that luxury. So we have to determine, how do you get that same information without GPS?
Generally, what pieces of the lander are you working on?
Yeah, so hardware-wise, I mean, we do touch a little bit, but not so much. It's the nav pods. And so that's specifically a terrain camera to take images of the moon to help determine where we are, a laser rangefinder to help determine how far away you are from the moon.
Kind of. kind of laser rangefinder. But so speaking of the infamous laser, I think one of the things that really confused people is that initial answer that Steve gave of, it's kind of like a weapons safety trigger, and someone's impression could be like, oh, you forgot to hit the button. A lot of things come into my inbox like, hey, don't forget to hit the button this time for the laser rangefinder. That's not really how that worked at all. But I still haven't really wrapped my head around what was the understanding of there was a cable there.
Yeah. So for our test units, when we were going out doing helicopter testing and whatnot, it was a switch. And so
so at one point it was like an actual switch.
It was a physical switch,
okay.
Yeah. And the reason why you have that, and you've already kind of alluded to it, is it's a Class 4 laser. And so they do rate lasers based off their safety. Class 4 is the most dangerous. It will blind you if you're looking directly at it. And so because of that, there's a number of safety features in it, built in, just to make sure that you don't accidentally fire that laser when you're not supposed to. So there's flight software triggers that you have 2 of them that you have to get through. But then also there's a physical switch on there to make sure that, yes, I am connecting power to that laser, and so that you're cognizant of that beyond any software. And so for engineering units, for our test units that we were going out and flying on helicopters, we had a physical switch that, as we're sitting there, we're very cognizant of, hey, we're flipping the switch, and now we're going to go enable it via software. So for the flight units, you don't have someone on board to go flip a switch.
Right, there'd have to be like an alien out there.
Yeah,
Wait to
exactly.
flip the switch for you.
And so what we had was just a hard bypass. We were supposed to just wire that in, and that was missed. And so the reason why you couldn't just go hit a button or go, change some code, was it was a physical inhibitor to giving power to that laser.
So it was something that there's something over like 3 miles of cabling on a lander, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was something in that cabling that would have been added eons before the mission into this cabling to turn it on.
Yeah, so it was like the cabling we built in-house, for the flight units. But I think it was because of that disconnect between the, test units having a hard switch and then the flight units not having it. There was a miss in, there's no switch, so it doesn't exist. And so when we were building our cables, we missed it. So,
and its function is when it's operable, right? Its function is it similar to going golfing and trying to spot how far away you are from the green, but just a more powerful laser, trying to figure out how far you are from things?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that those lasers work, right, is they're going to send out essentially a pulse, this high energy pulse. I think throwing out a number, and I wouldn't stand by it, wouldn't bet my 401k on the number I'm about to give you, but I think it's like 1,000 nanometers wavelength.
It's all right. Most people aren't gonna critique you on the amount of nanometers there, but
fair enough. But there are enough hobbyists out there that will. But anyway, so it sends out this pulse, and essentially what's going to happen is it's going to hit some object, and you're going to get some return. And that's what. And on that laser, you have a receiver. So that receiver is going to pick up those return pulses, and it essentially has this threshold that once it hits a certain value, it says, "Hey, I've gotten so much percentage back of that return pulse." And, based off how fast light travels, and I know exactly when I emitted that pulse, I can tell you how long it took to hit that object and come back. So I know the range from that object with high accuracy.
And that was something that was built into what you were saying, like you built the nav pod, right? So you have a laser on one bit, and then you have a camera in there as well.
Yeah.
If you have a laser to tell you where you are, what's the camera's function in our ability to land?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, like the big thing with navigation is, you got 3 dimensions of position that we talked about. You're trying to estimate 3 dimensions of velocity. You're trying to estimate, and then orientation is actually more of like a 3.5 dimensions. Mm-hmm. You can't quite describe it with 3 dimensions, but 4 dimensions. You also have interdependencies, and so you've got this, however you want to split it, 12.5 state. Estimation that you're trying to do, and nothing's going to give you all that information, right? So you can imagine that if I had a laser, it's pointed straight down, and I'm flying, that's going to give me my altitude, like 1 dimension of position. And so what the camera can kind of do is also give me not direct information of one of those states, but I can extrapolate the information that camera gives me to get even more information about those other 12.5 states.
I think Tim touched on that. That's the DPOS camera. Is that part of this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Delta position.
Yeah. And probably the more appropriate name for like the hobbyists out there that work in GNC. It's more of a visual odometry measurement. And the reason why you want to make that distinction is you're not actually getting a delta position from a camera, right? Because a camera doesn't actually have any reference to length or scaling of what it's looking at. It's just pixels. And so when you're taking those images, the way that DPOS works is it takes 2 sequential images, and then all it says is, hey, I'm going to look for what I call a good feature, something I can easily identify. Now, that's very different from when me and you look at an image and what we would call a good feature. But based off of what it finds and descriptors around it, it says that's a good feature. I'm going to track that. And when it takes that second image, it's going to say, based off the descriptors I say for that first image, I'm going to try and find that exact same feature in this image. And, it's going to find a few of them where we target about 300. And then based off of how it's observed those features moving, mm-hmm. it's actually going to tell, our system how we've moved with respect to the ground that it's looking at. And so what you get out of that is a direction of motion. Again, because you don't have scaling of what are the size of the objects I'm looking at, all you can really say is, I know I'm going in that direction.
Right. One of those images from that camera, I mean, it's really sharp. I mean, it looks fantastic. But those are two elements. Is that part of optical navigation? Is that right? Is that kind of lumped into that? So you have your laser, you have this camera taking pictures and doing references. I think you said there was a third item in there too. There's another measurement you have to do.
Yeah, well, so there's like two other sensors in there. There's one more, what we call like a discrete sensor, which is like information that comes in at distinct times. So like, you're going to get an image at like a very distinct time. You're going to get a laser range measurement at a very distinct time. The last one that's a very distinct time is the star tracker, which is another camera, but it's taking images of the stars to give you orientation information.
And collectively, you put all that little bit together, and that's your world, right? It's the world you work in.
Yeah. That's where I guess our job security comes in is, okay, you've gotten all this information, but what does that tell me about the states I'm interested in? And it's like, okay, well, we're going to go convert that for you and tell you what it tells you about those states and how confident it is in those states.
So those you have all of those things. They perform in an ideal world, and then you're able to do things like land on the moon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Think out of those three tiers, you take any one of those away. Is it something that, well, I don't think I can land on the moon, or is it something that they can work independent to do? What was your interpretation of, finding out, the laser rangefinders aren't working? Because originally, when we thought we were flying low, said, oh, we'll turn them on, didn't get any readings. So naturally you think, hey, we turned them on, we didn't get any readings. That means we're much higher than we believe we are and everything's okay. Came back and said, hey, we don't think these are working at all. How did you receive that information? Were you on shift at the time, or did somebody call you and, hey, by the way, I know you needed those three things to land on the moon, but you're going to do it with two.
Yeah. So I guess in answer to the first question of can you survive without one of those components, one of the most interesting things about navigation is it's very problem dependent. And so if you say, hey, I'm taking out this sensor, I'm taking out this measurement, can you land? It's like, well, I can tell you what my performance is going to be without it, because you are going to be now blind to some aspect of those states that I'm trying to estimate. Mm-hmm. If whatever your mission is can survive with a larger uncertainty in that state, then yeah, you're fine. If it can't, then yeah, you're going to crash. And certainly for us, it was a huge concern. So I was on a console when we were first testing those lasers. And what was interesting was with one of them, we actually got a return pulse or a return reading. And the reason why we got that is so kind of how we described that receiver, how it's looking for a return pulse.
Right.
If it gets one, it's going to say, hey, that was my measurement. Now, of course, ambient light is also just going to kind of send back noise from the sun hitting the moon and those waves reflecting back at the receiver. And so what we do is we actually have a parameter in there, and it's called our threshold, where we can kind of listen just to the ambient noise of the sun hitting things and just waves coming back. And we'll say, okay, well, that's our peak noise that's going to come out of white noise. So we're going to set a threshold that says ignore everything that's below that. But if you haven't set that properly, you might accidentally get a false return. And so we hadn't set that quite yet, just because we were initially testing to see what that needed to be set to. And we got a return pulse. It was clearly wrong. So we knew, okay, that was not a measurement. That was a false return. But yeah, with the other one, we got nothing. But we're also getting information about, are we sending out a pulse? Are we sending out information? And so it wasn't just that we weren't getting a return measurement. Just nothing was really communicating with us. So we knew that there was something deeper in the actual internals of the lander that was wrong than just, oh, we're high enough, we're fine.
Right. Okay. There's a little. It's different perspectives, right? Of getting things back, not really knowing what's going on, but like at what point are you thinking through that whole process of learning that, hey, something's not right? You're getting back bad data. When was that, and you know, how much time did we have to land on the moon? Because in my mind, my first question was, okay, we have a problem. Why don't we just stay in orbit for as long as it takes to fix it, right? Where were we? Was that it was after the correction burn, right? But how far were we from landing, or our estimated time we thought we were going to land, when we really knew and understood those lasers weren't going to work?
Yeah. So it was, I don't know if there was like a distinct moment that we knew like we're completely broke, you know, because when we first tried to fire them, we weren't getting a response. So we knew that there was an issue. Whether it was resolvable or not, we didn't know. And so credit where credit's due, the software team in the back were the ones who really cranked out all that analysis and were trying to diagnose the issue. And we're the ones who eventually found out what the true issue was. And so I wasn't actually even aware of it until I was walking out of my shift. So, you know, that's when blue team comes on. They're the ones who are handling the landing. So there's about 9 hours between us and our anticipated landing time. That's right when I was walking out that I was thinking, okay, I can kind of breathe, you know, like my shift is done. And that was very wrong because so someone came running out and said, hey, we need you in the back room. Lasers aren't working. And it was about that time that I realized, okay, this is more serious than just like a software fix that we need to do. By this time, we were very familiar with putting in software patches. So as I went back there, you know, they started expounding on what the full problem was. And that's when it was, okay, these are clearly not going to work. We need a separate solution.
And so that's only like a few hours before landing. Right, that the time was ticking. You can't just stay in orbit for 4 days while you try to figure out a solution. Tim Crane was on and telling us about, okay, well, we have this idea, right? There's other lasers on board. From your side of things, how did that develop? And not just a software patch, but we were also working in FlatSat trying to test things out on our own as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's such an important part of that is it was like such a group effort, you know, it's unfortunately, you know, one person sits in the seat and talks about it, and that's who you subscribe to the solution, and it's very much so not that case, you know, there's so many people, so many smart people that were working on that issue and trying to resolve it. And so, yeah, it's an interesting perspective. The reason why we had those other lasers, but we weren't using them at those higher altitudes was because, well, number one, their operating range was lower. You know, they are eye-safe lasers, the NDL, the one that
NASA's navigation Doppler lidar.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, they are eye-safe lasers, but you know the cost to that is they have, you know, their pulse isn't as strong, and so their operating range is significantly lower. And so talking about, you know, our cost-benefit ratio of, hey, this sensor's not working, what does that do for you? The thing that we had to determine was, okay, well, if we get this altitude information later in the mission, what does that do to our landing footprint? What does that do to our system as a whole? And so with a lot of these systems, there's a lot of uncertainty just in the measurements themselves, you know, errors that you can't account. Well, you know, perhaps their magnitude and their characteristics. So you can kind of model them in simulations, but you can't fully diagnose what those errors truly are on the lander. And so what we do is what's called Monte Carlos, where you run hundreds of thousands of cases with these errors in them, you know, taking on these different forms to understand what the full breadth of my landing footprint could be. So whenever someone talks about like the landing footprint or, you know, our expected errors, that's what they're talking about. And so with us, it was, okay, well, what is that? How does that footprint change with a NDL where we're getting altitude information later on than what we expected?
So that's, we intended to get it really high above the moon, and we ended up not having that option. So you're saying NDL is just, we'd have to be closer to the surface in order to get those readings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So less time to react and land safely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What was the process of someone making a decision of, hey, let's try to use these versus implementing those solutions. Because on our side of things, we're in lunar orbit, and then someone comes back and says, "Hey, we're going to take another lap around the moon." What were your folks working on in that time?
Yeah. So what we were doing was, it was Tim who initially proposed the idea of, well, what if we use NDL, and to do like kind of a minimum change in our software. Essentially, we were lying to our flight software and saying that it was the flare unit that we were expecting, but we just had to make modifications on how it was pointed. Mostly that, and then a little bit of the noise changes to help it understand the errors that were coming in with it. So with a navigation system, the way that you observe, you go from, I guess, a measurement to those state estimates that we were talking about, was you use your state estimates to estimate what you expect the measurement to be. So you have some mathematical functions that you write out, and your input function to those functions are your original state estimates. And you're going to predict what you think the measurement's going to be. You're going to compare it against the real measurement, and that's going to help inform you of how far off you are. So if my measurement model is saying that, my laser's pointed, in one direction, but it's truly pointed in another direction, you can see that would increase the error. A simple example of that would be like if I'm, in a if I'm in an airplane, let's say, 10 meters off the ground, and my laser's pointed straight down, it's going to read 10 meters. But if I'm pointed off like 45 degrees, it's going to be 10 divided by 0.707.
Or just longer. It's going to be further away, right?
It's going to be longer.
Further away.
Further away.
So I can see that trick of figuring those things out. So does that mean for you, you're writing code to send it to the lander while we're circling the moon and in and out of signal? What's your feeling in that moment of time's ticking? We're gonna touch the moon in some form or fashion while you're trying to do this. What are you feeling and working on at the time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's it's nerve-wracking to say the least, as you're writing this code to, make sure you're doing it right. So when you are dealing with those orientations, that's kind of one of the more complicated forms of that flight software, is writing those and making sure you're writing them correctly. And the time is ticking. So you don't have, a day to go write it and then go test it to make sure it's all working properly the first time. I wrote it, but then I also had two guys that I knew that were very competent, one of them being Tim, to check over it to make sure it worked. At that point, pride shouldn't be a factor. We're a team. And so, hey, if I've got something wrong, let's have someone correct it.
Nobody wants to be the person blamed for not landing on the moon either. That's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, well, I mean, like everyone, you're here late nights, you're here on weekends, you see other people here on weekends, and you don't want to be the guy who ruins everyone's efforts because, negligence.
So what does that look like? I mean, are you just sending him an email and like, hey, here's the code line that we need to send to the lander?
Luckily not. No. Electronically that would be probably a little too much of a latency in time. So everyone we knew that we wanted for any given issues, we already had in the vicinity. And so luckily they were both already in the building. And so I just grabbed and said, hey, I wrote this. Let me show you what I did. This is what it's doing. Does that look right to you guys? And sometimes they said, well, hold on, let me digest a little bit, pull out a piece of paper, write it down, make sure that they feel, that it was correct too. But no, it was over the shoulder actually.
So meanwhile, we don't have signal going around the moon. We think we have this solution. What happens next? And kind of walk me through that last. I mean, it felt like an eternity, but really that last bit of descent down to landing, and then waiting for what really felt like an eternity, for Tim to come on and let us know that we're not dead yet.
Yeah, that was that blackout period was a ride. I'll tell you that much. So as we descended, I mean, we were glued to the monitors, but I don't think you need to say that. That goes without saying. But yeah, we had, as I said, a couple of our nav folks in the room. So specifically for if anything went wrong, we have the expert in the room with us. So we were all sitting there, reading the same monitors, the same data that the folks in the control room were reading, just in the back room. And to like Sean and Tim's credit, who were in the foreroom, every time we saw something, we're like, oh, hey, get on the loops and tell them about this. Almost immediately, we'd always hear Sean or Tim come on and announce it too. And so, I mean, the team as a whole was very aware of what was happening and what was most important. So we certainly had all the confidence in the world in the people in the front room that they were going to make the right decisions, that they were very aware of what was happening.
What was your confidence level in the lander without its original laser rangefinders?
I was concerned, right? Because so with that, you don't have the luxury of going and running all these Monte Carlos, of doing like a full analysis of what that landing footprint looks like. So there was a degree of uncertainty in what our performance truly would be. Certainly it was our best decision and our best call in the moment. And so we knew that as it was coming down, whatever happens, this was our best foot forward. And so there's all the confidence in the world in that. But yeah, there was still a large uncertainty of what that performance is going to look like. So we were holding our breaths to constantly looking at those state estimates, those confidence intervals to see how it was going. As we were hitting that blackout period, we saw certain things kind of drop out a little bit. So really, as the CPU was really getting exercised, there was just certain telemetry that wasn't coming down. And then, of course, we pitched over and we completely lost comms. And that was a scary moment. But we did reach a point where we thought, hey, if we've landed, we've already landed. And so for myself, I thought, yeah, well, we tried our best. It's over. I was walking out. And as I was walking out, I heard that we had a signal. And
you were on your way out thinking that it was over.
Well, yeah, not walking out of the building. I was walking out to talk to some other guys like, yeah, that was rough. But yeah, and then I heard, yeah, no, we got a signal. And yeah, that was the ride.
Yeah, for you personally, how long did it take for you to really take it all in and say, man, what did we just did it? I mean, how long does that process take to go from what went into it, right? Those weekends in the old building with, Josh Bluth's dog running around on the 6th floor up there to you're in that same, on the 6th floor again, but this time you just landed on the moon.
Yeah, I don't know if it fully hits you all at once, I mean, even still, you walk outside, you look at the moon and you get that deja vu moment of what has happened. And so, yeah, it's certainly a special moment, but I don't know if it really hit me until probably the next day, after you get home and actually get some sleep for the first time, a couple of weeks. But yeah, and then what a special moment, right, for all of us.
So what's next? IM2, right? Lessons learned from IM1. What kind of things are you working on beyond just making sure we have the laser rangefinders on the second mission?
Right, yeah. Well, and the star trackers.
And the star trackers. That was understandable. The way that Tim put the star trackers, where we put those guardrails in, and it just being a little bit off to not get it right from the start. That was, he put it really well. So we got laser rangefinder, star tracker right from the get in the beginning of the mission. What other things are you working on for IM2 technology-wise that are, improving from the first mission?
Yeah, so certainly, even those are the major issues for IM1. Those are also the easiest fixes. There's just certain things that when you launch off into space, the ambient environment is 100% different than here on Earth. So there's only so much you can test, and so those kind of issues that appear in the true environment of a mission are invaluable, but you can only really find them in the mission. But they are easy fixes. The bigger ones that we're really working on for IM2 is IM2 has to be a lot more accurate than IM1. So IM1, we could get away with about a kilometer footprint. IM2 is down to 50 meters.
So a footprint is in, I intend to land right here, but we could make it happen if we did it over here, 50 kilometers away.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Yeah, so
this one has to be how close for IM2?
50 meters.
50 meters.
Yeah. So it's I'm going to land here, and I can't be wrong by more than 50 meters.
Why?
You know?
Why is that?
So we're going further in the South Pole, right? And the reason why we're going further in the South Pole is because a lot of people are interested in water, and that's the most likely place it's going to be. But the reason it's going to be there are the same reasons that make it very hazardous to land there. And so when we're trying to hit somewhere of interest, it's also going to be very hazardous for our lander itself. And so we have to be very confident in where we're going and that we're going to actually hit that point. And so for IM2, it's, well, we have the same sensors. We can have the exact same sensor config. How do we extrapolate more information than this direction of motion and this range from the moon? And the one big one for us is, how do you know exactly where you are on the moon? Because if you're trying to hit 50 meters, you need to know exactly where you are. So one of the things we're doing for that is what we call LOSS. It's an acronym meaning line of sight to surface. And what it's doing is it's taking images of the terrain, just like the DPAWs.
Hold on. I'm still tracking loss. It's line of sight
to surface.
To surface. So the thing that needs to make us pinpoint accuracy of knowing where we are is actually lost.
Yeah, it's the acronym is
all right.
Almost ironic to
we'll
what
stick
it's
with
doing.
loss. We'll stick with loss. But anyway, so loss is helping us get from a lot closer. I mean, was that like 20 times more accuracy landing?
Yeah. It's telling us where on the moon we are because it's taking images of craters, and then there's kind of two components to it. There's the component that says, hey, identify what a crater is, which anyone familiar with image processing knows it's no small feat. But then it's also saying, okay, now what crater is that on the moon? Because as soon as I can identify, oh, I'm looking at this crater on the moon, well, I know where on the moon that is, and I know where I am with respect to that crater, so I know where I am on the moon.
So that process, so like, let me rephrase that. So we had a camera on IM1 that was taking pictures. We saw some of those awesome pictures, and we could tell, what crater it was. So for IM2, we're doing the same thing, but with a different process that makes it more accurate?
No, so for IM1, we were able to take images and, like human in the loop, identify what crater we were looking at.
Oh, there was a human who was looking at it.
Yeah, who said, oh, hey, this is the crater we're looking at. This means that this is where we are on the moon. But now what we're doing is we're taking that capability and making it autonomous. The vehicle's now doing it.
Okay, so the vehicle's taking the pictures and processing them on the second mission to make decisions on its own?
Just to figure out where it is more accurately.
Okay.
So what it's going to do is take that image of that crater and say, oh, that I'm with that crater is this far from you, and it's here on the moon. Where do I think I am on the moon? Oh, no, I'm actually supposed to be here. So it's like a direct observation of those 3 degrees of position.
Yeah, true autonomous flight.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. How's it going? How's that tech development going in-house?
So today we're actually testing it on the computers right now to test its performance, how long it takes to run. And so, the development's there. We've tested it, in our software configs to make sure that it works. Now, of course, the big one is how robust is it? Make sure that it's accurate at identifying craters.
And then we'll just have to leave it as a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Now we'll come back and we'll make sure we give an update to everyone, because if we just leave it right there, those will be all the questions that come in. So we'll just we'll make an update video on the pod. We'll get you back on to let people know how accurate we think we can get this thing after testing today. What time? What time's your test today?
So they're working on it. They're actively working it right now. So,
all right.
But first tests, there's always bugs you're ironing out. So we'll see how long it takes.
All right. Well, the gentleman who wrote the code for really rescuing the IM1 mission with the team, I guess we'll let you get back to it to land the second mission and come back and let us know how the test went and how accurate we can get this thing done.
Okay, appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening to the This Way Up podcast. Please subscribe for next week's episode when we talk pics or it didn't happen. Radio frequency engineer Michaela Landivar joins the show to bring you into the untold story behind why one picture from the lunar surface wasn't so easy.